Human cultural attaché Marcus Reed stood in the formal reception hall of the Thessaran embassy, carefully observing diplomatic protocols and trying to ensure his delegation didn't inadvertently commit any culturally insensitive errors. This was his primary function at these events: cultural liaison between human and Thessaran diplomatic staff, interpreter of customs and traditions, guardian against the kind of misunderstandings that could create diplomatic incidents. The Thessarans were relatively recent members of the alliance, still integrating their traditional social structures with the wider galactic community's expectations and norms. Cultural misunderstandings between human and Thessaran officials were common, sometimes comical, occasionally diplomatically problematic. During the reception, Marcus was formally introduced to Lady Calcynthia, daughter of one of the prominent Thessaran noble houses and an accomplished diplomat in her own right. They had a genuinely pleasant conversation about the challenges of cross-species cultural navigation, the nuances of linguistic translation that software couldn't fully capture, the complexities of maintaining traditional cultural identity while engaging with diverse galactic community. She was clearly intelligent, remarkably engaging, and Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the interaction beyond mere professional courtesy or diplomatic obligation. Then, as the formal reception concluded and guests began departing, Lady Calcynthia made a formal announcement to the assembled guests in traditional ceremonial Thessaran. It was a series of formal phrases Marcus recognized as important ceremonial language, but his translator software rendered the exact meaning somewhat ambiguously. Something about choosing a path forward, declaring clear intention, and claiming a sacred bond. Marcus assumed it was some form of formal gratitude for their conversation, or perhaps a diplomatic courtesy statement he wasn't fully comprehending through cultural and linguistic filters. Several Thessaran guests reacted with visible surprise, but he attributed that to his status as human, probably somewhat unusual for a noble daughter to engage so directly and formally with alien diplomatic staff member. When he casually asked his human colleagues afterward what exactly Lady Calcynthia had said in her formal announcement, they were genuinely uncertain. The translation had been heavily formal and apparently dependent on cultural context they didn't fully grasp. Something about choosing you as something important. The translator software gave multiple possible interpretations depending on social context we don't have access to. Marcus didn't think much more about it. He'd had a pleasant and apparently successful conversation with a prominent Thessaran noble, probably missed some cultural nuance in the farewell, but clearly hadn't caused any obvious diplomatic problems. Mission successful by his standards. Then, exactly 3 days later, an official galactic contract document appeared in his diplomatic correspondence queue. It was a formal legal document, properly notarized by Alliance legal authorities, referencing specific Thessaran bonding customs and citing particular statutes about cross-species marriage recognition under Alliance constitutional law. The document listed Marcus Reed and Lady Calcynthia as formally bonded life partners under Thessaran cultural law, with full legal recognition and binding status across all Alliance member states. According to this official, legally binding contract, they were married, legally married, officially bonded, completely binding under Alliance law. Marcus stared at the document in complete disbelief, certain there had been some kind of catastrophic administrative error. Marcus immediately contacted Alliance Legal Services, explaining carefully that there had been an obvious mistake in contract filing. He'd had a single pleasant conversation at a diplomatic reception. There had been no marriage ceremony of any kind, and this document must represent wrong filing or possibly identity confusion. Alliance Legal Services reviewed the contract in detail and informed him the document was completely valid with no administrative errors. Under traditional Thessaran bonding customs, which were legally recognized throughout the Alliance under cultural preservation statutes, formal marriage didn't require ceremony in the sense humans typically understood. Thessaran bonding required formal declaration by one party and acceptance by the other party. The declaration had to be witnessed, but no elaborate ceremony or extended negotiation was culturally necessary. Lady Calcynthia had made her formal bonding declaration at the reception, witnessed by dozens of attendees. Marcus's continued warm conversation with her after the declaration, his failure to immediately and explicitly reject the proposal, and his cordial farewell were all interpreted under Thessaran legal customs as clear acceptance of the proposed bond. The marriage was completely legal, entirely binding under both Thessaran cultural law and alliance constitutional provisions. Marcus protested vigorously that he hadn't understood what was happening, that the translation had been ambiguous, that he absolutely never consciously intended to accept a marriage proposal he didn't even know was being made. Legal services sympathized with his position, but explained that the contract's validity didn't depend on his subjective understanding at the time of declaration. Thessaran bonding law operated on the clear principles of formal declaration and non-rejection. His lack of explicit rejection within the culturally appropriate timeframe, approximately 60 seconds after the declaration, legally constituted acceptance under Thessaran custom. They could certainly file for formal dissolution of the bonding contract, but that process required either mutual consent from both parties or compelling proof of fraud or coercion in the original bonding. If Lady Calcynthia didn't consent to dissolution, and there was no demonstrable fraud or coercion, the marriage would legally stand until either party died or both explicitly agreed to formal termination. Marcus immediately arranged an urgent meeting with Lady Calcynthia through formal diplomatic channels. She arrived at the human embassy clearly expecting a very different kind of meeting, dressed in formal ceremonial attire, bringing small traditional gifts, appearing genuinely pleased but also somewhat nervous. Lady Calcynthia, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I genuinely didn't realize you were proposing marriage at the reception. The translation was ambiguous. I didn't understand the full cultural context, and I absolutely did not consciously intend to accept a marriage proposal. I'm formally requesting that you consent to dissolving this bonding contract. Her reaction was not what he anticipated. Her long, elegant ears, the distinctive Thessaran physiological feature, drooped dramatically in the expression Marcus had learned indicated profound disappointment or emotional pain. You didn't understand what I was declaring. You didn't consciously choose to accept the bond I offered. I didn't know you were proposing marriage. The translation gave multiple possible interpretations. I thought you were making some kind of diplomatic courtesy statement. I would never consciously accept a marriage proposal without actually understanding that's what was happening. Calcynthia was silent for a long, painful moment. In my culture, I declared with complete clarity. I formally chose you as my life partner, claimed you as my bondmate, announced our sacred union to assembled witnesses. You continued speaking with me warmly after my declaration, smiled genuinely, thanked me for the conversation, bid me a cordial farewell with clear courtesy. All of that, in my cultural framework, constitutes unambiguous acceptance. If you had wished to reject my proposal, you had every cultural opportunity to do so clearly and immediately. Marcus realized they faced a fundamental problem. What had been an ambiguous translation error and cultural confusion to him had been a clear, intentional, deeply meaningful marriage proposal to her. What had been continued polite diplomatic conversation to him had been joyful acceptance of life partnership to her. They were both completely correct based on their respective cultural frameworks and understanding, which unfortunately didn't resolve their immediate legal problem. I'm deeply, sincerely sorry for the cultural misunderstanding, Marcus said carefully. You clearly believed you were making a proposal I fully understood and was consciously accepting. I genuinely did not understand what was happening. I never intended to mislead you about my feelings or intentions. But we cannot possibly remain married under these circumstances. I didn't actually consent to marriage, even if I accidentally signaled acceptance through cultural misunderstanding. Will you agree to formal dissolution? Calcynthia's expression showed profound internal conflict. In Thessaran culture, bonding is considered sacred and permanent. Dissolving a bond without extremely serious cause, documented abuse, fundamental betrayal, severe incompatibility discovered after significant time together, is socially devastating. I would be formally marked as someone whose bondmate rejected her, which would effectively end my social standing and eliminate any future marriage prospects. My family's honor would be seriously damaged. I'm genuinely sorry about those consequences, but I cannot remain married to someone I didn't actually choose to marry just to protect your social standing in your culture. I completely understand your position, but I'm asking you to seriously consider an alternative approach. Alliance law and Thessalonian custom both formally recognize this marriage as completely valid regardless of the initial misunderstanding. We are legally bonded whether we individually like that reality or not. Rather than seeking immediate dissolution, which seriously harms both of us, you being forced into unwanted marriage and me being socially destroyed by public rejection, could we instead attempt to understand whether this bond might actually be worth maintaining deliberately? Marcus stared at her. You want me to stay married to you so you can see if I'll eventually actually want to be married to you. I want us both to have genuine opportunity to make an informed decision rather than reacting immediately to cultural misunderstanding and translation failure. You didn't consciously choose this bond initially, but now that it exists both legally and socially, you can choose whether to maintain it based on actual knowledge of me as a person and potential life partner, rather than based purely on the accident of translation that created the bond initially. Marcus wanted to refuse immediately and unambiguously. This was an absurd situation. He was legally married to someone he barely knew because of cultural misunderstanding and translation software limitations. But he could see the genuine distress in Calcynthia's expression. Understood intellectually that immediate dissolution would destroy her socially and professionally through no fault of her own, and recognized that alliance diplomatic relations with the developing Thessalonian cultural integration might be damaged if this became a public scandal about a human diplomat accidentally marrying, and then immediately rejecting a prominent Thessalonian noble. How long are you suggesting we maintain this arrangement before making a final decision about the bond? 6 months. Sufficient time for us to actually know each other as individuals, understand whether we're genuinely compatible, and determine whether this bond that began accidentally might become something we both choose deliberately and consciously. Marcus agreed to a 6-month trial period, primarily because he felt genuinely responsible for the cultural misunderstanding and didn't want to destroy Calcynthia's entire life and social standing over his failure to understand Thessalonian bonding customs. They established clear boundaries. Separate residences maintained, no expectation of romantic or physical relationship, purely focused on actually getting to know each other to make genuinely informed decisions after 6 months. The Alliance diplomatic corps was informed confidentially, and arrangements were made to extend and modify Marcus's assignment to accommodate the unusual situation. What Marcus genuinely didn't expect. Calcynthia was a truly remarkable person once he actually got to know her beyond formal diplomatic interactions. She was a brilliant diplomat with sophisticated understanding of multiple cultures' social structures, a gifted linguist who spoke 6 languages with genuine fluency, deeply thoughtful about the challenges of cross-species communication and cultural preservation. She had a sharp, sophisticated sense of humor, genuine curiosity about human culture and history, surprising vulnerability beneath her carefully maintained, formal noble persona. They began spending substantial time together, officially because maintaining the appearance of a valid marriage required some degree of public interaction, but increasingly because Marcus actually enjoyed her company beyond obligation. She taught him about Thessalonian culture, history, the complex social structures and traditional customs he'd only understood superficially through diplomatic briefings. He shared human cultural history, helped her understand nuances of human communication and social interaction that formal diplomatic training didn't fully convey. Around month 3, Marcus realized with some surprise that he was genuinely looking forward to their scheduled meetings. That he felt disappointed when diplomatic duties kept them apart for extended periods. That he found himself thinking about her when she wasn't present. Around month 4, during a dinner at a restaurant representing neither culture specifically, Calcynthia admitted something significant. I proposed to you at that reception because I'd been observing you for months during various diplomatic functions. I found you genuinely fascinating. Your obvious curiosity about our culture, your genuine respect for our differences rather than judgment, your remarkable ability to bridge understanding across species boundaries. I knew it was extremely bold to propose after a single extended conversation, but Thessaran custom explicitly allows for such declarations when one is completely certain. I was certain about you. You were certain based purely on observing me from a distance at formal diplomatic functions. You didn't actually know me as a person. No, you're correct, but I knew enough to want desperately to know more. The bonding declaration was my way of formally saying I had chosen you as worthy of that deeper knowing. I simply didn't anticipate you wouldn't understand what I was declaring. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. If you'd asked me 6 months ago whether I wanted to be married to anyone, I would have said absolutely, not without any hesitation. If you'd asked me 4 months ago whether I wanted to stay married to you specifically, I would have said definitely not. If you ask me now. He paused, seeming to struggle with the admission. Now I genuinely don't know, which is terrifying in some ways, but also, maybe not entirely terrible. 5 months into their agreed arrangement, they weren't merely maintaining the appearance of a valid marriage for social and legal purposes. They were actively building an actual relationship. Not because of legal obligation or social pressure, but because they were genuinely compatible in ways neither had expected or anticipated. At the agreed 6-month mark, they met formally to make their decision about the bonding contract. We agreed to 6 months to determine whether this bond was worth maintaining deliberately, Marcus said carefully. I've spent those months actually getting to know you as a person, learning who you are beyond the cultural misunderstanding that accidentally created this bond. And I've realized something important. If you propose to me now, with me fully understanding who you actually are rather than accepting accidentally through cultural confusion and translation failure, my answer would be yes without hesitation. Calcynthia's ears lifted dramatically in the distinctive Thessaran expression, indicating profound joy and relief. I chose you initially based on observation and intuition about your character. I choose you now based on 6 months of actually knowing you as a complete person. The bond began accidentally through misunderstanding, but it doesn't have to remain merely an accident. Are you proposing again? Because this time I actually understand what you're asking, and my translator software is working properly, and I'm completely clear about Thessaran bonding customs. I'm not proposing. We're already formally bonded under law. I'm asking whether you're now choosing to maintain that bond deliberately, now that you fully understand what it means and who I am as your partner. Yes, I'm choosing to stay married to you, not because of legal obligation or fear of diplomatic incident or concern about your social standing, but because over the past 6 months,